Thanks for tuning into this episode of the Put a Fork in It podcast, the podcast delivering fresh perspectives at the intersection of food, health, business, and creativity. I'm your host, Caylena Cahill, founder and creative director for CC Photo and Media, Hudson Valley, New York-based photocentric marketing company. Today's guest is Chris Short. He's a fellow digital marketing pro. Officially, he's currently the digital marketing and video production strategist for DragonSearch in Kingston, New York. But, as you'll soon hear, he's come on quite the journey in his career, from starting in manufacturing literally on the line making semiconductors, to working internationally on oil rigs, and so much more. Chris and I first met when he did a presentation on digital marketing for our local Chamber of Commerce. I was there as the corporate photographer documenting the event and was really impressed with what he had to say about social media marketing and how to leverage personality types on a team. We spoke after the presentation, and I learned more of his background and his experience serving food clients from Ginsberg to a local chocolate company. Our conversation on the podcast was rich and wide-ranging. We expanded on some of the concepts from the seminar, and it was just great to hear from someone with such a variety of experiences and great expertise in everything from communications to relationship building to storytelling, leadership, and more. Whether you're new to marketing or an old hat, I'm sure you'll get something new out of this episode. Chris offers some really great nuggets and some awesome alliterations as well. Seriously, who doesn't love alliterations? Anyway, I'm excited to share this interview with you, and I hope you'll be as inspired as I was and find some useful and tactical information that you can put into practice. And now, enjoy the show. So we have Chris Short here from DragonSearch and many other places as well. Thanks for joining me on the Put a Fork in It podcast.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
Sure. So in the intro, I've mentioned a little bit about who you are, what you do, but just to get the audience caught up, can you give a little bit about who you are, what you're doing, how you got there?
Sure, of course. My name is Chris Short. I'm a digital marketing and video strategist for DragonSearch. We're a marketing agency up in Kingston, New York. And what's great about the job is I get to kind of tackle a bunch of different things, from any type of digital marketing, from SEO to CRO to working in social, and then the ability to go out there, videotape it, and tell that story. It's great.
Cool. So I know just from having talked to you before that you've worked in a lot of other areas as well outside of just marketing. So can you give a little bit about how you got there?
Sure. My career started years ago working for IBM. I worked in semiconductors, worked my way up through the engineering field, ended up on oil rigs in South Korea, did some work there. And what was great is from that that was about 20 years of my career between the two. What that did was kind of show me not only how people work well together, but some of the pitfalls that working in tough climates, tough different areas, things like that, and how you have to adjust your management, teaching style, leadership style, and that's kind of evolved into some of the presentations that I do now for all kinds of different organizations, locally and across different states.
Okay, and so what does that have to do with digital marketing?
So digital marketing is all about telling stories and how people, they sell their products, how they sell themselves as an organization. And the big thing with digital marketing that what I learned overseas and all the different places I've been is that there's a lot of concepts that are timeless and universal. People love to hear the why. It's usually not like, I have this cool product or I do this stuff and just yell it from a soapbox. They want to know how you got there, how you kind of put it together, and what was the reason for doing what you do. And that transcends across all different product categories, all different verticals, even different countries. And a lot of people don't realize that we're all pretty much the same no matter where you go.
What is verticals?
So verticals, let's talk verticals. So verticals, when we use it in context, something like the automotive market, the energy market, the photography market, restaurants and the food business, all of that is a vertical. So you can use one vertical, we'll just say the food business, and that can break down into restaurants, food prep, education, distribution, all of that, from grocery stores to the mom and pop on the corner. So it's a way for us to kind of communicate what is our core audience, and then from there we can fine tune it a little bit farther.
So how does vertical different from industry?
It really doesn't.
So it's just another
It's
word
kind
for
of
that,
another,
basically?
yeah, it's another word for industry, but what it does is it kind of classifies all of it. It's just some of the internal jargon that we use in digital marketing, talking about verticals and which way we want to go. Kind of gives you that proactive, moving up and out into the world kind of concept.
So how do you get from semiconductors to oil rigs to digital marketing?
Wow, that's the adventure right there. So I worked in semiconductors for about 18 years down in East Fishkill, and I worked for IBM, Philips Semiconductors, finally NXP, and they were a division of Philips Semiconductors. And if you recall, a few years back, probably about 6 years ago, they shut down a factory. So a friend of mine, actually, this is the power of digital marketing. All of my jobs since then actually came through LinkedIn and networking. So it was really important for me to have a tight relationship with everybody and not just a, hey, we're friends. It was really kind of reaching out. And a friend called me up from Houston and said, hey, I heard you're looking for a new adventure. So he says, we're going to ship you down to Houston. We're going to strap you into a helicopter, and we're going to teach you how to get out of, in a swimming pool, how to get out of there with Navy SEALs. I said, well, how does that have to do with the job? He goes, well, we're going to fly you out to oil rigs, tankers, cruise ships, any floating vessel in the middle of the ocean. You're going to do some training and education, teaching people how to use the networking systems that you've basically been working on for the last 20 years. So from there, I learned how to communicate, especially in tough conditions, when there's people that come from different backgrounds, different countries, language barriers, age difference. All of that really comes into play when you're trying to tell a story of how technology works and how it kind of builds into safety. Now, this was a big part of back when BP had that issue in the Gulf. What a lot of people didn't realize is that some mistakes were made, but there's a way to look at the bigger picture, and it was a communication breakdown. So I took this as an opportunity to go out into the field and use what I learned over the last 20 years in business and turn it into a teaching moment. Flash forward, a friend of mine called me up through my connection on LinkedIn and said, hey, we're looking for somebody with project management background, technology background, and a marketing background that can actually put a camera in their hands and actually film. You seem to fit that bill. Why don't you come work in the digital marketing side? Because it's basically telling stories to wide audiences, and with your background of telling different ways communication kind of affects people, let's do that and let's put it into the marketing world. So here it is, 20-something years later, from start to finish, the journey from semiconductors all the way to digital marketing.
So with semiconductors, were you an engineer building them, or what were you doing with them exactly?
So I started on the line, just a regular production. Manufacturing, yeah, that was where I started. And then from there, I worked up through the ranks in supervisory roles, and then I actually got into a training maintenance role, where we would actually film and document how people would do a lot of their work out on the tools. What we found is when we actually, a picture, as a photographer yourself, right? Mm-hmm. A picture tells 1,000 words. So what we did was put a plan in place to start telling those stories from a technical side, so we can actually improve productivity, improve tool performance, and we saw double-digit returns immediately right out of the gate.
So who was that geared towards? Was that geared towards like training purposes, or was it like, it wasn't for marketing, right? What was it for exactly?
So that's funny. It was marketing to the point where it was training the internal employees. So it was a mashup of both. So it was
training.
Right. So what happened was we had to make sure that everybody bought into the idea that this was the way to go, that this was the right decision. So there was a little bit of a marketing twist put on how this training could make things easier, faster, and more productive. So It was basically for the employees, but we had to sell them on the idea first.
Right. So it wasn't like just, this is how it's done, but it's also, this is why it's done this way. Exactly. And, getting them to be on board with that. Exactly.
So it was really diving deeper into the why for the message to ring clear. We had to basically disseminate that across 800 people. So to make sure that that message was consistent and made sense, there was that branding piece of, hey, this is something that will make your job easier.
So how did you really get people to be engaged with that? I know that some people think that, that a lot of that stuff is kind of cheesy, and they look at they'll go into it for training for some kind of company, and it's all woo woo rah rah, this company's so great, and so how do you get beyond that to actually get them to care and think it's actually interesting and not just a bunch of BS,
right.
basically?
Well, the hard part is really addressing the what's in it for me. And that rings true with any marketing, is trying to show how the product, which was the training, added value to their everyday job. It's just like when you're talking about, selling anything. It's really what is this product do to make your life better? That's the same thing when it comes to training. If it showed them how to be safer, faster, more efficient, everybody has that time where you're ugh, you roll your eyes and you're like, where do I go to next? What we tried to do is show them that this is one way to kind of make this a smoother transition between shifts, between people. And that's the same thing when it comes to today's marketing, especially in all the different verticals that are out there. You're telling the same story.
And so what kind of work were you doing with the oil rig folks?
Well, same thing. It was interesting because the way I was tapped for that project was my background in technology, taking a complex system and translating it into an everyday practical use. So with all the fiber optics, there's miles of fiber optics and networks, and all these complex systems have to talk to each other, that the biggest point of breakdown was between one person and another, and a person and the machine. So it was real easy to kind of step into that role and explain the same thing to all of the crew that worked on every vessel. How do you take it from a 500-page document and turn it into an actual usable sort of training? And what kind of came out of that is they wanted to know the why. Why is this important? Why, and it was funny, I didn't have to kind of stand on the soapbox. They were actually asking. And they saw value in some of that training and some of those tests and all that kind of work out there on the field. They saw that as an asset because it really made their job easier. And at the end of the day, we all want that, right?
Mm-hmm. Okay, and so I also remember from our conversation prior to this interview that you mentioned having interviewed for the company that you're currently working for previously and not having gotten the job, but then years later you came back and got a different job. So
Absolutely.
So what happened there?
So about 5 years ago, a good friend of mine reached out, and same thing. It came through LinkedIn, so I'm a big promoter of networking and why social is important, why real life connections are important beyond the like here or there, or the superficial likes on social. He actually called me and said, same thing. We're looking for an actual a project manager that can help kind of pull things together. And I came in, interviewed with the owner, and it was almost 2.5 hour interview. And at the end of the interview, the timing just wasn't right. He said, this is exactly what we're looking for, but we're not ready yet. And you take that conversation, flash forward a few years later, we left on good terms and said, just keep me in mind. A similar opportunity presented itself, and because I interviewed so well and left an impression with the kind of vision I had for how to take a project to a next level, that they called me back. And, long story short, I got the job, came in, and I've been working there for the last 2 years, and it's been pretty amazing.
What is your vision for how to take a project forward?
What is my vision? Well, the big hurdle is getting everybody on the same page. And I do a lot of training. We just booked one of my trainings internally at work, trying to share the big picture of resource allocation. So that's a fancy term for who do I work with and what can they do? And in a lot of companies, people don't know the talent sitting right next to them. What do people do on the outside? What do people do for a living? What do they specialize in? What's their background in? It's just not the regular day-to-day tasks, but what do they bring to the conversation? And when you want to move a project forward to a different level, the key there is knowing your resources. So, and if from a small business to a big business, you need to know what talent is in your, basically in your cubby there, right next to you, and then what talent is across the whole company where you can actually draw from. And understanding what that is from department to department and how that can apply to different parts of your business is the key to moving up. Nobody can do it alone. Everybody needs a team.
So how do you figure that out?
Well, there's a great exercise that I share, which I think you had the privilege of sitting in on part of it recently that you saw, where there's 4 different personality types that are out there. And it's not an easy, it's kind of like a modification of the Myers-Briggs kind of concept, where everybody has, when they're under stress, they fall into 4 separate categories. You've got the warrior, you've got the healer, you got the visionary, and you have, someone who actually kind of looks forward to how things happen, and they're more analytical, and they use data as opposed to the visionary that looks forward and uses big picture ideas. So the exercise that I do with a lot of the people that I teach helps identify where you fall into that category, and at the same time, it helps you identify who on your team falls into that category. So everybody has a role to play, and sometimes you're just in the wrong spot on a team. And by understanding what your natural inclination is, some people may think, well, I'm a type A personality, when they're really not. They're maybe like a B-, but they're really good at numbers. So each person, it actually boils down to what they actually are. And there's ways to blend between all 4 different directions or 4 different types. But once you understand who you are and how the team members that you work with fall into those categories, then you can turn that into actionable items when it's expanding your business, if it's trying to land that big contract, or build a bigger team to go on to bigger things.
So can you give a brief overview of what each of those types are? Because you're right, I was there, but I wasn't really, it was kind of at the end.
Yes.
So I didn't really see it.
Sure. So you have the North, which is your type A personalities, the people that love to be in charge and be out front. And I grew up with a laser pointer in my hands. Used to sing in a band, so I was the front man there, and I've done a lot of presenting, so I'm the front man of an office kind of boardroom when it comes time to present. So the North can be very bullheaded, very, sometimes they're like, oh, I'll just do it, right? You're just that person, but like, if you want something done, do it yourself. Sometimes you fall into that category. Whereas South is complete opposite. I had somebody that they take the input from everyone and kind of pull it all together. So they're more of the healer, where they're actually the kind of person that makes sure that everything's fair and balanced, and we've got a nice kind of groove going on in the office. Then you have your analytical types that are hard pressed for numbers, right? Those are the ones that use data to make their decisions and kind of use that as their backbone for moving forward. And then you have the visionaries, your Steve Jobs of the world, that think big and use all 3 of the others to kind of make that happen. So there's usually a balance, and there's a time and a place when you have to be a certain role. But when push comes to shove, we all kind of gravitate towards one. And if it's a visionary or it's somebody who's thinking big, the downfall is that sometimes you're not time dependent. You're like, well, this will be great, and it's all kind of out there. The North can be seen as cold, the South can be too feeling, and the analytical can be too logical, right? So for every plus, there's a minus, and it's really the trick to the whole thing is kind of balancing when those resources are used and identifying those in others, so that way you don't see it as a negative, saying, oh, well, you're too analytical. Well, no, that person's role is really good at this time on this project. So really being self-reflective, and I struggle with this, I consider myself a North, and that's one of our traits, is that, we don't like to be wrong. So it is definitely a struggle to kind of look in the mirror, and that's the biggest thing. Ego is a big piece of that. and admitting you're wrong and trying to figure out which direction you need to go and using those resources are key. So it's a tough hurdle, and it's tough for people to kind of see that.
So is there like a test that you can use for this, or
There's a
you
test.
just sort of have to like
You need to go through my seminar. That's what you need to go.
I need to come back to the other seminar
Right.
on time.
So there's not really a test. It's really think about what type of person you are when you're under stress. So if I were to take my Myers-Briggs course, I'm actually an INFJ, which basically means that I'm an introvert, which kind of blows people away because I'll stand in front of a room of 2,000 people and they're like, well, if you're an introvert, how does that kind of play into when you're under stress? Well, when push comes to shove and I got a big deadline, what I do is I'll kind of go into into my office and kind of hunker down, right? And I'm turning inward to make sure that everything's ducks in a row, right? So what usually happens is your true personality comes out when you're up against the gun, right? And that's how you can identify what are your common traits and how does that kind of jump around based on the input, external stimuli from, that client calling you up, arguing with how a project's been done, or somebody giving you praise or different things like that. You can kind of take those as moments in time and kind of reflect on, well, how am I reacting to this? And that's the number one thing that when people come through the class that I teach is, that kind of gives them a little feeling. They're like, wow, you know what? This is actually me. And once they realize the strength of their personality and the weakness, it makes managing people, projects, and businesses that much easier.
Now, where did you get this east, north, south, west construct from?
Sure.
Because there's a lot of different personality tests and different things out there. So.
There is. It's called the Leadership Compass. It's actually kind of comes from, the basis of it goes back into Native American folklore. But at the same time, there's a couple different organizations have had modified versions of this. And being an old school Boy Scout myself, I saw it as an opportunity to kind of take some of the things that I've learned over my career, starting from when I was a Boy Scout and a Cub Scout, and all the things that I learned about teamwork there. And then how do you make it practical? And just kind of breaking it down into simplified form really makes it easier for people to kind of gravitate towards, because today there's so much noise, with everything when people are trying to figure out who they are and what direction they want to go with their business, that having 4 decisions is a lot easier than these millions of decisions. So I felt it was a good representation to kind of translate and share from a story based, because I think everybody can identify with who's that one person in the office that does this or does that, right? The big joke is you've got the North who always kind of points to, let's get, what's the bottom line? Let's get this, let's make this happen, right? Charge forward. And then you've got someone in the South that's like, don't forget to sign the birthday card, because everybody's important, right? And it's sometimes when you think about it, you're like, oh, I know who that is. And what's funny is every time we have a seminar or a workshop and it's with people that know each other, what's funny is watching other people point to who falls into what role in the office. And then when it all starts to make sense, it kind of just, they're like, oh, that's why that happens that way.
Yeah, that's the moment that I walked into the seminar.
Yep.
Okay. What about people that are indecisive?
Indecisive.
Because I'm listening to some of the descriptions and I'm like, yeah, that's me. Yeah, that's me too. But they're not in the same quadrant.
Right. There's a lot of overlap, just like when we talk about generations, right? So, we were discussing earlier the difference between Gen X and millennials and
the differences.
Yes, the differences, and that many people relate to both. I kind of fall in that category, and some of the things you were talking about earlier too, right? It falls into both categories. So there's no clean line with personality types, even when it comes to generational, gaps and different things like that. That it's really kind of the environment you work in, and sometimes it'll shift, and that's part of the workshop is where do you fit into what role and when. So there's a time and a place, and sometimes you need to step back, especially as a North. I got to learn when to shut up and back up and let somebody who's more proficient in the numbers, somebody who has a bigger picture like the visionary that can pull forward. And what I found out, which was an interesting conversation at the last workshop that I had, find out that people in sales are usually a South. The highest number of sales are South, and that's because they can empathize and they can actually see where the client's coming from. And they could say, oh, okay, that makes sense. So there's more of a feeling piece going there. And people actually react to emotion a lot more, with a lot more enthusiasm, if you kind of tap into that emotion, right? So you've got the movies that make you cry and the books that scare you. It's that emotion that really grabs you. So what I found in probably the last 10, 15 years of me teaching some of these classes is that sales usually falls within the South category. And then what they do is they actually lean on the analytical in the North to kind of open up doors. And then it's the visionary that kind of helps paint that narrative. So it really reinforces that even though we're not just one category all the time, sometimes we have to shift our roles to be a little bit more empathetic in how we listen, how we react. And what a lot of people take away is there's different ways to kind of communicate with people. So I'm a visual kind of guy. So I use words like, I see what you're talking about. I'm always looking for this. So you're using those visual cue words. There's other people that refer their auditory. So they say, well, I hear what you're saying. You're not really listening to me. Things like that kind of trigger how they interact with people. And then you have somebody that's more tactile. So they'll say, well, this doesn't make me feel right. Something's not, this doesn't really sit well. Things like that are more feeling based. And what's great about identifying how people communicate that way, you can use the four corners or the four directions coupled with the way they communicate and use that to kind of convey your message. You can take that and mirror that into digital marketing, the way things are on Facebook and all of the digital platforms that are out there. That can go miles, right? We all click on those videos. That copy. It's the one that kind of piques our interest.
So over years of teaching this kind of personality stuff and communication skills, have you noticed any tendencies between the genders? Like any kind of, like men tend to be more this way and women tend to be more that way? Or you've really seen it like a huge mix and there's no kind of correlations?
I have to honestly say that it's pretty well balanced. Depending on the group of the room, if it's 50% men, 50% women, it's usually split up amongst the four corners pretty evenly. You see a lot of business owners that fall into the North category, especially when they're starting their business and they're kind of driving forward. And then there's like an evolution to people that as their business is kind of on autopilot, their behavior may shift a little bit more into the analytical side in the West and kind of settle there because now they're using data to make decisions. And when it comes to the genders, it really it's all over the map. It definitely does not lean like all men land here, or all women land there. I've seen groups that are split 50-50 right down the middle.
And what about culturally?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Culturally, I think, to be honest, I think it really depends on the culture they came from. If it's a different country and how early they kind of moved into their career path. So a lot of engineers, I've done presentations for engineers, and a lot of engineers would come from either India or Germany, places like that. And what's interesting is a lot of them would fall into the North category, but they would still have certain tendencies of data and analytics as well as South with the healer mode. So it's interesting. I haven't seen any clear lines drawn, but there is some correlation between, I think people from different cultures actually have the hardest time picking a corner or a direction because they see a lot of different values for when and if that kind of comes into play.
So it sounds like what you are saying is that this personality thing, it might not be a cross-cultural thing. It might be like based on American values or the values we have in our culture, and it could shift depending on
absolutely. I think over the last few years, and I think for us as a society, right? Think of the way society has changed over years. You go back 50 years, and this kind of goes into the Gen Xers versus the traditionalists, the baby boomers, and then how they interact with millennials, right? All three generations look at things differently through a different lens. And for a lot of cultures outside of the United States, sometimes that's not necessarily the truth, right? There's a lot more emphasis on using those resources that you have from family and coworkers, where sometimes, the shift in America has been, do it yourself, make yourself kind of like that independent person.
Self-made millionaire.
Self-made millionaire, exactly. And what people are finding out is that sometimes those rules don't apply, and it's really the resources you have around you that makes the difference.
So you also mentioned that when you were doing the oil rigs and everything, you were traveling a lot, and you were going to like Asia and everywhere. So what was, how did you manage to communicate with everybody and get everybody motivated and everything like that within that situation? It just sounds intense.
Yeah, it was. What was really good, and this might be a little bit nerdy of me, but
nerdy's okay.
Engineering was the initial language that we spoke, right? Using documentation, numbers, things that are universal constants, where a piece of equipment is supposed to be, 100 volts or put out a certain amount. There's really no bias in there. It either does or it doesn't. Mm-hmm. So that was an element where we could build trust. That was the first thing, is understanding that the documentation was the bridge that we were coming together over, right? We both wanted the same things. We wanted a piece of equipment or an idea or something to work the way it was intended. So that's where it started. After that trust was built between the two, then it bridged into, who are you, right? It was more or less, all right, so I can see your stuff on the technical side. What about the personal side? And it's the same thing when we talk about relationship building when it comes to networking, is you just don't make friends with people. If you're a banker, you just don't go out and meet other bankers and that's it. The deep relationships that are built are based on your kids in Little League, my kids in Little League. We have something in common. And that was the same thing overseas. It was, what do we value? Friends, family, time off. What do you do in your downtime? And where the true bonds were met and where trust was deepened even more is after work, you go down, you have a beer. So I worked in Korea for a long time, so we would go down to a local barbecue place, Korean barbecue, and we would just talk. And even though there was broken English, I worked on my Korean, they worked on their English, and we found that there's two things that are universal that I found, especially in traveling. I mean, I've been to South America, I've been to Africa, I've been to Middle East, the Far East as well, and leadership and laughter. Those are the two things that resonate no matter where I was. If it was in a Best Western in French Guyana on the east coast of South America, or if it was in Hong Kong on the 40th floor in a high-rise working with guys from Scotland, leadership and laughter. People craved leadership. They wanted somebody to trust, and they wanted to know that you're human, and that was the laughter side. So you hit both of those at the same time over a period of weeks, and I found that the third week, it takes 3 weeks for somebody to kind of see both of those sides in you. The technical side was the leadership, the laughter was the personal side. And about the 3-week mark is when they kind of opened up and said, all right, it's not just that guy over there, that's Chris, that's John, right? It became a face and a person instead of a number.
How do you apply that in networking then?
Like
how you say you got your jobs from LinkedIn, and like it's not just about like a random like, and so tell me more.
So you don't want to be that person that calls up your friend with the pickup truck when you need to move, right? So I use that as the example. We all have that one friend that calls. If for people who have a pickup truck or a trailer or something like that, you get that one friend that calls up and kind of comes out, hey, I'm moving, can you help me? But they don't have any interaction with you until you need something. When it comes to networking and building relationships, it's about who the person is, it's about what they do, it's about what they believe in, and it's basically, if you're going to be, the problem with social media is people are forgetting how to be social. And that's like
That's
the big,
ironic.
it's totally ironic, right? And a lot of people have heard about this where, and live it, where we've become more detached and we kind of just stalk each other on Facebook or stalk each other on Instagram and kind of look through a little window of time. And that's not really building a relationship. It's what you do offline. It's the handshake at the chamber breakfast, talking to somebody. It's that person, kind of keeping them in the loop, saying, hey, this is what I'm going, congratulating somebody on a promotion they got or a new job, and genuinely reaching out to them and saying, hey, that's great, and then not asking for anything. And I think we all struggle with that because we're so busy and we're so bombarded with so many different things that we have to do in our personal lives that sometimes we forget that. And I struggle with it. Everybody struggles with it. But sometimes you just have to kind of slow down once in a while and figure out where are we on the spectrum. And I try, once a month, I'll go through my LinkedIn. I've got 500, 600, 700 people on LinkedIn, even Facebook. If I hadn't seen anybody in a long time, I'll kind of go to their page. What have they been up to? What are they doing? And, that's the downfall of some of the algorithms, is that we're letting technology dictate what we want, right? We've all heard that different social platforms are basically catering to your likes. So
creating echo chambers.
Exactly. So I think the big thing for a lot of networking in today is to get out of that. And I always use the term IRL, right? Take the URL and go to IRL, and how do you make that happen, right? So that's why I'm here today, right? We actually met, we connected after the event online, but then we took it personal. I just took a direct message off of Twitter. A gentleman kind of emailed me and said, hey, I really like your pictures. I've got an idea that I want to bounce off of you. And we talked on the phone for an hour, and he's from California and I'm in New York, and I don't know him, but we had a fantastic conversation, and he's one of the people that gets it. And it's basically making social media social again.
Taking it from, like what you said, the URL to the IRL.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I use that a lot.
Making it real, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Making it not just a identityless person on the other side of a screen.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Cool. So I think maybe let's move into some marketing stuff.
Sure, no problem.
So this is a food podcast. Why did I bring you on here?
Because I've done food marketing.
Okay.
That's where our two worlds intersect. So a lot of background on technology, but this kind of brought me full circle when we met. You told me you're a food photographer and you're in the food vertical. The food vertical is one of the things that you do that, not only in just photography, but, nutrition and all of that. And, we were trying to discuss how can we pull this all together? And what I found out is there's a lot of companies out there in the food industry that are struggling with marketing. And that was one conversation that we jumped on. And there's people that get it and they're kind of jumping on it. And then there's others that are kind of doing it the old way, right? And there's a big shift in our culture right now on eating healthy, eating green, eating different things from kale to quinoa and trying to make
nice alliteration. Kale to quinoa.
Kale to quinoa, right? It's going to look good on a pillow. I'm going to start, that'll be my podcast. Kale to quinoa.
That's a great title, actually.
I think that's my new Twitter handle, Kale to quinoa.
I like it.
But what's interesting is a lot of companies, and when I say companies, I mean restaurants and maybe inns or people that actually bakers, different things like that. They only have maybe a Facebook page, and we always tell people, hey, that could go away. And they look at me and they're like, why? It's Facebook. I'm like, how many people? And usually in our lectures we ask, how many people have a MySpace account? Because that went away, right? It may be dusty, but it's, things shift, things change. So what you want to do is build an online presence around, what you're doing now with a website, and use social media as a way to bring people back to your real estate. So gone are the days of the brick and mortar businesses. Everyone can do freelance. Everybody can do different catering, different things like that. If you do have a brick and mortar business, that's a way to kind of highlight that and use it as a broadcast mechanism, not a safe harbor, because it could move and shift. A lot of the food industry, when it comes to restaurants, they're asking, why are people not coming to my restaurant? And they're kind of stuck in 1985. And they feel, well, I have a website, but I built it 10 years ago. And let me tell you, people notice. If you're not updating, right, we all do it. You go to a website, you're like, circa 1990, 95, where is all this coming from? And I think a lot of people kind of rested, a lot of old school restaurateurs and things like that, where they get stuck. Well, this is the way I like it. They're a little bit hard to shift into the digital age. The ones that do get it are willing to listen to their audience, and that's where digital marketing comes in. So I've done work with Ginsberg's. I spoke at the Ginsberg Inspire conference. I've actually worked on some video projects for Fruition Chocolate in a show can. And the big thing that resonates, and we all know this, is like the food photography business, right? This is where, we're all guilty of taking a picture of that birthday cake or some awesome dish, but now there's whole lifestyles dedicated around food between the Food Channel, all the food bloggers, right? Yourself, right? A food photographer. That food porn it's eye candy in a digital world. And in a time when things like food comforts people, seeing images of different, makes them explore a little bit farther. So when you don't change your menu and you don't change your website and you kind of keep things status quo, people lose interest. But it's for the people in the food industry that are staying on top of the latest trends like kale and quinoa, grab and go. Dining has changed in such dramatic ways, from McDonald's offering apples and salads from years ago to now a lot of fast food chains are really kind of diving in. Now there's different fast food restaurants that only do salads and different verticals that basically pull in those new flavors, those new spices, those new tastes and everything.
Fusion.
Yeah, there's a whole fusion thing going on, and I think people are becoming more adventurous. And the reason for that, especially when it comes to digital, is trying to find something new, right? Because there's so much noise on the net. People are looking for something new. So it's our job as marketers to kind of showcase that something new. And when businesses in the food industry get it, it just clicks and people respond.
So instead of asking, what are the tactics that you need to use, because I think people know, maybe they don't, but a lot of people, they know the tactics. They know, okay, I need to update my website. I know I need to have like the Facebook and the Instagram and the Twitter and the this and the that. But then they just get overwhelmed and they give up, right? They're like, oh, well, I tried advertising in a magazine once and it didn't actually do anything, or they think it didn't. They don't really know if it did, and so they have this idea that marketing doesn't work, or, oh, my restaurant has been here forever and, I have customers and everything, so I don't need to do marketing, or I don't need to do this, or, oh, I don't have time, or, oh, it's too much work. So sell that person for me.
Sell that person. That is what we do every day.
How do you get them to do it? How do you get them to see the value and not think it's a sham?
So we've got stats and statistics where we can show. The one video I helped produce with Fruition, and actually it got posted on Insider Dessert, was the behind-the-scenes footage of making chocolate. And it was basically I shot for a day. I went to their factory. I basically worked with their team and kind of showed the why and the how. So this still resonates when all of your marketing. People like to see the behind the ropes, right? The VIP tour. People want to know, and people say, well, what do you mean? People want to know where their food comes from, right? So there's the whole fresh, nutritious, sustainability factor. And if you can show them how something's being made, that's more intriguing than here's my menu, because you're really just showing the end product. You don't know if it's come from, is it sustainable farming? Is it, did it come from someplace overseas, or was this grown in a local orchard? Things like that. And that was one thing that really rings true with a lot of the up-and-coming restaurants is they're showing you the how and the why behind. What do they believe in? People want to align themselves to things that tie into their ideals and the way they kind of walk through life. So if they're interested in a healthy way of living, they want to know that the actual food that they're eating at the restaurant that they love to go to falls within those guidelines from how they're going to kind of move forward. So we have to tell that how and why. And what usually happens is the biggest, most impressive, I guess, engagement online focuses around those behind-the-scenes videos. Facebook Live is taken off. Instagram stories, you have all of that where people actually can take the time to watch your bartender creating a new drink, or your baker, what is he doing to put together that awesome loaf of bread that's going on behind the scenes, because normally they can't get behind the counter and watch that, but you can introduce that to them on social media, and that's where everything's going when it comes to food. Seeing a plate is great. Let's look at it. Let's go back to something that people can resonate with, those tasty videos. How many times have we gotten sucked into those where you're watching somebody make a recipe from scratch and you see how it's all put together? It's not just the finished plate. It's like, let's do that. Why is Cake Boss amazing? Why are these celebrity chef shows so good? Why, everybody from Fuller Farmer to Rachel Ray to Gordon Ramsay. It's the journey to get to the end project that people are intrigued with. It's the same reason why we like Big Brother. It's reality, right? It's that reality. It's like, what happens when you're not standing there? And it's an interesting shift in society that they want that behind the ropes tour, and that's where digital marketing's headed.
So, being that everybody has a phone and everybody themselves could say, okay, well then I'll go on Facebook Live right now and show this, or I'll go on Instagram and do an Instagram story, or people that have YouTube Live or whatever. How does quality play into this? Is it important to have hire a photographer or a videographer to plan this ahead of time and come in and do that, or is it do the consumers really care?
They do. It's depends.
And this is not just a self-interested
no, not at all.
Self-promotional oh, you should really hire me as a photographer to come do this for you. No, I'm wondering this myself sometimes because I see it and I'm well, I know myself. Say if I go on someone's website, I'm well, I'm really turned off if I go on their website and I can't tell what the picture is, or there's no pictures or whatever. But how much does it matter on social?
It depends on the audience and the timing, right? There's a time and a place. So when it comes to a website, when it comes to, would you use spray paint to paint your house, or are you going to have a nice looking house, right?
Unless you're a mural artist.
Exactly. So again, it goes back to the audience. I think what you want to do, just like in any business, you want to put your best foot forward. And there's a time for professional photography to make that. When you're doing display ads, when you're trying to separate yourself from the crowd in a noisy space on digital, it's those high quality images that really can make or break any advertising campaign. Mm-hmm. With that said, though, leading up to or behind the scenes is still a huge part of any content strategy. So if you were to promote an event, high quality photography is the way to go. Push it on your website, put it out there, kind of use it for your collateral that you're going to share to the general public. Leading up to that webinar, that Facebook, to show, hey, behind these photos, here's the how, right? So here's the end result, but here's the how, and this is why you need to work with me. So they work hand in hand. So it's not one or the other. Everybody thinks they're an Instagram sensation because they take one cool sunset picture, but that doesn't mean that you're a photographer. There's a time when you need to raise your game, and when you're actually building a brand, pro photography comes into play more often than not. And there is a trend. A lot of people use stock photography, but people have realized that that's impersonal. So a great way to use pro photography is to make it personal. Put you and your staff, show your new chef making that dish, bring a photographer in and really get the nice shot, because that alone will speak volumes, because you could put that on your website and then that'll speak to the type of quality that's behind there. But at the same time, you can do those behind the scenes, kind of like casual shots that kind of show the everyday life. So then that way, coupled together, you're painting a picture to your audience of the type of person or persona that your restaurant kind of puts out there.
Yeah, I mean, because I would say, well, there's no excuse for having bad pictures on your social media, because it's still your brand, and it's still, people are going to, have that instantaneous gut reaction to it, and it's going to have some kind of impact on how they view you, regardless of whether you think it is or whether they think it is. I mean, if you show a photo that looks terrible and people can't figure out what's going on with the picture, it may not ultimately influence them to not go, but it is gonna cause some doubt,
It will. It will.
So what do you say when someone says, oh, it's just social, it doesn't matter?
Social matters
on
a variety of ways.
In terms of quality.
When it comes to quality, I think people are willing to bend the rules of quality when it comes to certain things. But when it's really trying to show what your business is all about on a professional level, you've got to raise the game. I mean, Ford isn't using Instagram pictures from an iPhone to showcase their new car, right? There's lighting.
But sometimes Dunkin' Donuts or Starbucks or whatever might use user-generated content, which is that.
So
how does that play in?
So that's different. User-generated content's a whole different vertical. And I think it's essential, because what it does is it creates brand ambassadors. So user-generated content shows the community that you've created celebrating your work, be it a donut, a photo from, if you're having an art gallery, to anything that you do. People kind of step forward as a brand ambassador and use a digital handoff to people to share the experience that you've had, because then that gives your content legs. So that sexy picture of a burger or a donut or a kale salad brings you in the door. Mm-hmm. And then user-generated content takes over. There's your, someone taking a picture of their plate and their salad and their meal and sharing it out. Or they share how many times you have pictures of people when there's a large group of people in a restaurant and everybody gets the waiter to take a picture, right? So what you're doing is you're celebrating the event and the experience that a restaurant or a brand has given you. So there's a handoff. I see it as a handoff between using professional photography to kind of gauge your interest and show the sexy side of your business in a controlled environment. But then people love the behind the scenes that you can share as a business. And then people also use the brand ambassador user-generated content to make their decision. The reason why I say that is if you read a review in a newspaper or online or wherever, just some basic saying, this is the best pizza in town. But if your best friend says, this pizza is amazing, you need to go check it out, it's that kind of trust factor that you have with those people, right? And that community that's been built that kind of takes the brand to another level. And that's what user-generated content comes into play. So there's professional photography, there's behind-the-scenes footage and imagery, and then there's brand ambassador kind of content that gets shared across the web. And then you marry all three of those together, that defines your brand voice. And the strongest brands out there have that voice figured out.
So I'm imagining that there might be some people that would listen to this that are like, well, I'm just a small business and we don't have the budget to hire professionals, and that sounds like a lot of stuff to do, and I'm so busy working in my business that I don't have time to think about this and do it and whatever. So how can you empower them to know to do this, basically? How can you empower them to do this, and what are some easy ways to start?
Easy ways to start. There is a ton of new technology out there that allows you to take 1 hour a day or just a couple hours a week and schedule out all of your interactions with your community on Facebook, on Twitter, using things like Hootsuite and scheduling Facebook posts to go out at a regular time. What you're doing is you're going to be teaching your following that, one, you think they're important, that it has nothing to do with just money, that you actually want them to be part of your brand, whatever that brand is. And then being consistent with your message. And consistent is voice, what you're saying, how you're saying it. Is it technical? Is it fun and lighthearted? Is it like a lawyer versus maybe like a photographer? Would have two different voices. But what you want to do is be consistent. If you're posting once a week, we always suggest once a day or a couple times a day to be involved in that conversation. The last thing you want to do is to kind of let people come to your page and see that it's been dormant for weeks on end. Just showing a constant presence, even if it is just once a week. Start small. A lot of people, it's the elephant in the room, right? You got to start with one bite. I think the key to any brand is figuring out what your voice is and who your audience is. And once you figure that out, they'll help dictate how often and what message that they resonate with. And that ties into your analytics and your feedback loop. So you want to listen to what people are doing. I've come across a lot of restaurateurs that they built their restaurant around, well, this is what I envisioned my restaurant to be. And it turned into a clubhouse that was empty because it was just a clubhouse for one, the owner. What they figured out, and some have and some haven't, is they listen to the audience. When the gentleman I saw speak at a recent conference, he said he would watch people come into his restaurant, open the door, look around, stop, and walk back out, and he never figured out why. And they said, well, it was too formal, it was too stuffy, it was too old school, it was too nice, and it wasn't inviting. When you're talking about brand voice, are you bringing people in with the way you present yourself online and in person? Is that someone that you want to do business with? And in today's day and age, you have tons of tools that kind of do that, from research tools to, like I said, the Facebook and Twitter. Get involved. I was sharing with you earlier, one of the tools I like to use is BuzzSumo, because you can punch in by keyword. Would say if you're talking about food bloggers or farm shares or something like that, it'll actually pull up all the influencers and all the people in that short genre that speak to your audience. And you can see what works, what doesn't work, who has a following, who doesn't have a following, and see what works, and then see how that aligns to your brand voice.
So how can you figure out what your brand voice is and who your audience is and all that stuff? Like with the Clubhouse of One, how do you avoid that? How do you figure out what it is, and how do you avoid the Clubhouse of One? Well,
in today's day and age, it can go without saying that people don't like fake, right? There's fake news, there's fake this, there's fake that, right? So
you went there.
I had to, because I think that's the culture shift that people don't want. People are tired of being artificially sold on something, right? People are looking for someone who's genuine. This is the reason why, especially in the food vertical, that fresh, organic, sustainable, those aren't just buzzwords, that's a way of life. And when it comes to identifying that audience, if you align, you have to be genuine, right? And you have to be transparent. And you can take politics, and you can take your restaurant. It's the same thing. People want to know the why and the how behind every decision that you're making. So really, to find your brand voice is to be true to what you believe in and be genuine and share that. A lot of people feel they have to put on a front and put out a fake kind of vibe to say, well, this is what I think people want. It's if you build it, they will come concept, that if you have an idea and you want to promote that idea, people basically align themselves with people that are genuine. And in this day and age, just understanding what you believe in and sharing that will bring people in.
So that guy with the restaurant, the Clubhouse of One, was he not being genuine?
He was not being genuine to his audience. I think the idea behind that was he was just doing something that made him, all decisions were just based on him alone, not what he saw, like where he wanted to go. He was a little short-sighted. So the idea there was he wanted to have a thriving business with a younger generation of new clients coming in, but he didn't build that. It took a handful of people walking in that way until it clicked, where he could see, well, really, what's the audience that I want to go after? What audience do I have, and where do I want to go? And am I telling the right story? Am I telling people that, hey, no, this is a place that you can relax in. This is a place that you could show up in shorts and sneakers, that you don't need a 3-piece suit to dine here. And it took him a while to kind of get into that mode, because it was almost like a shock to him, where he had to figure out, why are people walking in and walking out? They'd come to the door, but they would change their mind. And it was because there wasn't anything that was inviting. In his head, he thought that his message was being conveyed, but he had to switch that message. So he was being true to himself, but he was kind of confused on what that image looked like. So he used the feedback from potential audience to kind of craft that message. And a little over time, he actually reached out, did some research about his target market. What are their ideals? Do they align with what I believe? And he was like, yeah. So he kind of changed his voice to bring those people in, and that was a big culture shift for him. And then it turned out to be successful.
Well, that's good. So talking about target markets, that's a big problem that I'm coming across when talking to small businesses. Is you ask them what their target market is, and they say everybody.
Yeah.
So how do you deal with that?
Well,
especially with restaurants.
Yeah, well, with the cool thing about digital marketing is you can be so focused on who you talk to when you're displaying an ad, when you're writing copy. With all the analytical tools out there, Google Analytics, Google Trends, you could see where things are going, especially how people are interacting with your website, and then just the trends. What's being talked about in the news, what's being talked about just culturally across society, and how does your business fit into that, right? One thing, there's three major questions that when we work with a client, you'd be surprised how many people don't have answers to these questions. So if you can answer these are the secret 3 questions, right? And here's the secret 3. What do you want people to know? What do you want people to do about it? And what does success look like? Just by defining those 3 elements, you can narrow down your target audience in a way that I think most people kind of overlook. So what do you want people to know? Well, I want to know people that I make ice cream from scratch, from local dairies, and all the ingredients are fruit from local farms and things like that. So even it's healthy ice cream, right? We'll go with that.
No sugar added.
No sugar added, right? Those type of things. And then what you do is that's the story that you tell. A lot of people don't have that message anywhere on their website. They just assume that if they kind of put it up there, that it's there. You have to fish where the fish are. Today's day and age with Facebook and a lot of the marketing tactics, you can say people who like this type of lifestyle, and you can define what that lifestyle is, put my content in front of them. And then that gives them the ability to kind of target the people that align with what their message is trying to kind of portray. But trying to figure out, what do you want people to know is the starting point about your business. Because everybody goes into business because they are passionate about something. So figure out, where do those passionate people live that think like you do, and then put your message in front of them.
And so back to your URL to IRL. So how do you get people to do more than just like your posts on Facebook? How do you get them to actually do business with you? Like, what's the link between that social media marketing or the digital marketing or any of the marketing? What's the link between that and actually doing business with you, buying stuff, going to your restaurant, ordering something on your website, hiring you?
So that's the golden goose, right? How do you turn somebody cruising through Facebook? One, we say slow the scroll. They stop and read what you're talking about. 2, how do you convert that into money? And there's a couple different ways that you could do that. You can go after fear, right? That you need to buy this because, or this will happen, or you can kind of, go, that's the fear of missing out, right? Or you can go the route of trying to show the value in what you do through a journey, like going through pain points. What do you struggle with? And be the solution for a person's struggle. And it could be, I can't find a good Thai restaurant around here, to bring them in, bring them through that user journey and that user funnel, right? From awareness all the way down to purchase. Sometimes you have to cultivate those relationships. You have to tell them your story of, hey, this is who I am, this is what I do, and this is why I do it. And then this is where digital marketing comes in, where if you create that funnel, you need to give people different ways to move through your content to show the value. Case studies work, going into things like white papers or testimonials. I mean, it doesn't matter where you are. It's an affirmation of, this is the quality of work that I do. Most people, when they look at reviews, there's new studies that show that people throw away the ones and people throw away the fives. The fives are all your friends and family saying, this person's amazing. The ones that they give you 1 star usually focuses on somebody having a bad day. Most people look at the 3s, the 4s, and the 5s because they're more accurate.
2s and 3s and 4s.
Yeah. Because that's a 2s, 3s, and 4s. Sorry, but what they do is they look at the aggregate of, well, what's the everyday?
What's the average?
Yeah. What's the consistent talking points? And it's not just somebody who had a bad day and took it out on the waiter, or is it somebody whose grandma just says, this is the greatest, my grandson's thing.
It's not user error either.
Exactly.
Yeah,
so I
get frustrated with that on like reading reviews on products and stuff, where you're like, first of all, the person that's writing the review doesn't know how to write a review, and they're not qualified to really be writing a review. And then you read what they wrote and you're like, well, that's a stupid review because A, you've only had the thing for 1 day, and B, the thing is you didn't read the instructions, or you just weren't using it right. So
there's a lot to be said. Reputation management is huge. So the worst thing you can do is be silent on reviews. If somebody says something negative, you have to be proactive and say, I want to make this right. Because if you do have a brand ambassador, your community will stick up for you. If it's something that's totally out in left field. The worst thing you can do is actually use that as just ignore it and kind of push it off to the side. But you can still step in and be like, I'm sorry, you had this issue. Next time you come in, let's make it right. And that'll show, even if the person doesn't respond, it shows the community that you've created that you are making an effort. I think far too often a lot of people just kind of cross their fingers and hope that things work out. Being a little bit more proactive in that regards goes a long way when you're building a brand.
Yeah, definitely. All right, well, I think it's about time to wrap up, but
Sure.
I do have a couple of questions that I always ask at the end, which you mentioned that you had listened to one of the episodes, so you heard this already. So the first one is, how would you define health and healthy, and why is that important?
Health and healthy, and why is that important? Well, I'll go backwards. The importance of being healthy is paramount now. The way I approach it from a health and healthy aspect, when I come from the business standpoint, is, are you making the right decisions? And that can go both ways, from what you eat and where you eat to how do you do your job. And it's really important because the big picture is sustainability when it comes to your business, to your career, to your personal health and well-being, that if you're making the right decisions now, that's an investment in the future. So when it comes to all across, you can plug that into anywhere. It's really thinking bigger than the short term and looking long term.
What do you see as the biggest issue facing our society as it relates to food and health?
Biggest issue, food and health. I think right now it's information. I think we as a society could do better on sharing information, podcasts like this, reliable news sources, I think.
What does that mean?
What
is a reliable news source?
A reliable news source is probably a place where trust is built with the big picture in mind, that it's not a short-sighted knee-jerk reaction to a fad, or something that kind of pops up recently. I think when it comes to health and how things are communicated, you have all the fad diets, you've got this diet, you got that diet, what's trendy. what's a quick fix. I think it goes back to the health and wellness question you asked. It's what's the long-term picture, and how are you communicating that to the people at large? And I think right now we're struggling with what that message is in some regards, and it might be cloudy for some people, but I think society's shifting and they're looking for new ways, and the outcry from people is, I need new information, I need more information, I need relevant information to make my life better. So when it comes to the food industry or how things are portrayed, telling the story accurately and consistently across the board, I think is going to make a world of difference in the years to come.
And what do you think is the most exciting thing going on in food and health?
Wow, so exciting. Being an engineering nerd, I gotta say technology. What's really cool about technology is how things, a perfect example, tilapia, they're using tilapia for healing burns and wounds. The skin of the tilapia, they're using that instead of bandages. When it comes to how food is being made and measured for quality and consumption, and I mean, you use technology with farming on fertilizers and using satellite imagery to kind of boost crop production. Health, I mean, think about all the cool stuff from transplants to eye surgeries and different things like that. So I mean, there's a lot of overlap between how food is created, distributed, and sold, to the effects that it has on the technology side when it comes to how we're living our lives. So I see both as pretty amazing on where things are going to happen in the next few years, with all the different changes. I mean, it's going to be pretty amazing.
Definitely. And is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, there's something that I usually teach at the end of my classes, and I'm trying to be more proactive in my personal life and professional life. Is the quote I use is to be a student of people. And by that, I think using that as sort of like a guiding mantra for me in the last few years has really opened up my eyes to different ways to communicate. Trying to be a little bit self-reflective on where I fall short, on not only myself, but then engaging with others and trying to figure out, what's the big picture? Like, how can I fit in, and how can I support? How can I lift others up? How can I make things better? There's so much negative in the world right now that I use being a student of people kind of like a way to focus on things. And that comes from health, wellness, technology, leadership, business relationships, taking URL to IRL. It all kind of comes together.
Definitely. Cool. So how can people get in touch with you?
I'm on Twitter, Short Out Loud. You can find me there. I've got shortoutloud.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, Facebook. That's the best way to kind of track me down. You'll see me out there in the interwebs, tweeting or posting about something in tech and business and where it's headed.
Cool. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Awesome. Thanks for having me.
Thanks again to today's guest for joining me on the podcast. I hope you'll get a lot from hearing this interview, and you're able to find some tangible information and inspiration to work towards creating a healthier lifestyle, getting started in the food movement or industry, starting your business, publishing your book, or going after your creative dream, whatever it may be. And finally, thanks to you, the listeners, for tuning in once again to this episode of the Put a Fork in It podcast, the podcast that offers fresh perspectives at the intersection of food, health, business, and creativity. I look forward to sharing future episodes with you and interviewing even more interesting people. If you have any feedback or suggestions on what you'd like to hear on this show, or you'd be interested in becoming a sponsor, email me at Caylena@putaforkinitpodcast.com. Don't forget to check out the episode notes and links, and leave comments over at putaforkinitpodcast.com. You can also subscribe on your favorite podcasting app and over on YouTube. If you love this show, you can leave us a review on Facebook or iTunes, and don't forget to share it with your friends. If you love this podcast and want to support it, please share it with a friend or donate on patreon.com/putaforkinit. And of course, make it a delicious day.